Now, is this the sign of City really struggling without Rodri and KDB? Is just the first bit of evidence to prove what we've all long since suspected, that they will continue to struggle without those guys in the team, especially Rodri and how important he's been to this Manchester City team. A 1-1 draw at St James's Park, which on paper isn't the worst result, but there was issues, I thought, in their attacking play, in the fact that they did struggle to break Newcastle down at points. It felt like they lacked a bit of an X factor, and as well, this was a Newcastle team that didn't come into this game in great form. Now, points wise, their form looks a lot better than it is, but they'd not been performing great, and it felt like City had ample opportunity. And it felt like they were the favourites to come into this game and really produce a performance that could get a good result for them, and just give that bit of extra momentum, getting a good 3 points away at a tough away ground. And as a result, it just felt like they lacked a bit of, let's say, just lacked a bit of that X factor, just lacked a bit of that top level quality through some of the midfielders they're missing that they usually get. And it's also worth noting that Phil Foden didn't start the game. He looked decent when he came on, but for some reason Pep Guardiola isn't keen from putting him in from the start so far. I know he was late coming back from the internationals, and then he had his injury over the international break just gone. It feels like he's a little bit hesitant to chuck him in. But we'll go over the City attacking shape first, and we'll really go into detail about it. So with Rodri not being in, that would mean that City were going to have to find other solutions to their midfield problem. And they've tried to fix it in this game through having Kovacic and a player inverting from the defence, which we'll go over in a second, and Rico Lewis with Ilkay Gundogan playing as a box midfield with the front three up top. And a massive issue with that front three up top is in the wide areas, they have very little 1v1 threat through those wings. Bernardo Silva and Jack Grealish are maybe more effective. They'll get you more goals and assists than Doku and Savinho will. But against this team, and as we'll discuss as the shape goes on, you really needed that 1v1 threat, I think. Without that midfield quality to help break a team down, committing players, causing players to come towards you, which you can beat, and then causing other defenders to have to commit to decisions, potentially leaving space for someone else, was going to be key. And they really struggled to get involved in the game. And the player inverting for Manchester City would be Manuel Akanji coming up from centre-back to form into that box midfield four with Kovacic, Lewis and Gundogan, as I said. And they would rotate, they'd be fluid, they'd be positionally very rotational. City then turned into the back three with Gvardiol and Walker tucking in to Ruben Diaz on the ball. And this did feel like an attempt to, if you couldn't match what Rodri gave you in terms of quality, what you can do is maybe bolster the quantity. I hope that added number with the technical quality could really disrupt that Newcastle shape and give them something to worry about that would have been different from Rodri, because they're never going to replace Rodri, but can offer a different threat to Rodri. But Newcastle, I thought, off the ball, they defended really well. They'd go in a high pressing 4-2-4, 4-2-3-1, where you'd have Anthony Gordon initially dropping onto Akanji in these deeper areas. And now I think that was a case of him doing that because they weren't really sure how the City team were going to line up. You didn't know who was going to be inverting, if Rico Lewis was going to be right back inverting into midfield or something else. And so it did feel like initially they were tasked with blocking off that central area. And to be fair, City haven't really been building up in a 3-box-4-3 attacking shape anyway, so this was always going to be a bit of a mystery. But they did adapt really well. So where Gordon would be sitting on one of the two midfielders, Tonali on the other one, Joelinton and Guimaraes sitting deep. With this shape, it gave him the license to go and press Ruben Diaz on the ball, who was the central centre-back. Murphy, Barnes covering the wider centre-backs in Walker and Gvardiol to press them, but also shadow passes going in behind them to the wide players who would be tracked by the Newcastle fullbacks. And you'd then get Bruno Guimaraes back in the press-up, jumping onto Manuel Akanji in this area, who would look to receive the ball, maybe around Anthony Gordon. And as a result, with leaving Gundogan free, you get Fabian Schär being aggressive, coming up into this area to press him, and again, just equaling the numbers up for Newcastle. Dan Burn being left 1-on-1 with Haaland, who could then match him physically 1-on-1. Obviously, doesn't have the pace to contend with him, but that was never really exploited that much. And as I say, with that lack of real penetration from the wide areas, and Grealish and Silva, who were both players that wanted to feed, you don't have Doku, you don't have Savinho coming from out to in these areas. They didn't have the chance to really hurt those channel areas in between centre back and full back, with Schär pulling out to receive the ball from deep from an Edison pass or whatever. They didn't have that capability. And so City would try and play through, but to be fair, Newcastle were pressing well, efficiently, forcing a few chances on the turnover. And with the City centre-back three, Gaps were either left in between or outside, so if they were far too narrow, there was space for Gordon and Barnes or Murphy to attack on the outside. If they were far too wide, they could make the runs on the inside. So they offered that penetration that City did not. They were aggressive in the midfield, they won their challenges well, and really caused City some problems. Haaland, I also didn't think opened up enough in these areas to receive the ball from deep from, a defender or a midfielder that's made an angle. There was a few times he did, and he wasn't completely useless with it. And he did offer some moments with his layoff that would give you encouragement if you're a City fan, but he doesn't offer it enough. And at points where it felt like that press from Newcastle's was really intense, he didn't offer enough of an option for them to break out and transition up the pitch quicker. Again, with Haaland not offering the shorter option, with the wide players not offering the penetration, there was a lack of real alternate quality as opposed to the build up, as opposed to the short passing. It was all a bit too predictable. There were points through their quality and through their technical press resistant passing where Newcastle would be forced back, and this is what it looked like. City's shape would be in a sort of 2-2-6 with Walker and Diaz as the two deeper players, Kovacic and Akanji. And I have to say, Akanji is a stunning footballer. Left back, right back, centre back, a sole centre back in a high line team if his centre back partner is going to press the ball and be aggressive. Full back where he can cover those out to in runs from wingers, inverting into midfield and being ready to press when needed, and the technical qualities that come along with all those positions. And he pulls them off fantastically. He's such an unbelievable asset to have because it's one thing to be versatile, it's another thing to be top quality and versatile, and he is that. And so he'd be along Kovacic again, a little bit of rotation. Sometimes it would drop into a 3-1 or even a 1-3 at points, but that was the shape. Gundogan and Lewis in between the lines with Silva and Grealish wide, and Gvardiol coming up from left back into the left half space to offer that overload in the central areas and trying to get in between Newcastle shape. But Newcastle were deep, they were compact, and it looks like here they were defending in a 4-5-1. It wasn't. At points, it became a 5-4-1 as Joel Linton would drop in to that left back position, pushing Hall inside. And I think a massive part of that was because Hall isn't amazing defensively. He can get caught one on one, doesn't deal well with moving between markers or having to deal with a bit of space that players can run into. And having Joel Linton drop him in just gave him a little bit of physicality, a little bit of help so he didn't have to defend one on one. And it was a tactical move that really paid off because Newcastle didn't get down that right side at all. And a massive part of that as to why, and this maybe explains why Grealish and Silva were in, but at points you had Newcastle, but at points you had City with this almost 2-3 in the middle. And again, it comes down to trying to use the quantity to beat the quality of what Rodri and KDB would offer. And I also thought this was a poor decision to not play Foden, because if you're going to go with this quantity over quality, those inches of space you create for your teammates in this position with the quick little movements of play, you drag a player out of position, you force a player from this position to engage, and then that next pass then becomes a lot more crucial. And you need someone who's going to be able to ride challenges under pressure, deal with minimal amounts of space to be able to produce their action. And Phil Foden is that, fantastic against low blocks in between lines and can make the most out of space when he gets it. He didn't start, and these attacking players found it very hard to contribute in these areas and really unlock that Newcastle backline. The only time they did was Gvardiol making this movement in here as Kieran Trippier got caught coming a bit too deep to Jack Grealish, who was looking to get on the ball. Jack Grealish beat him one-on-one, ball to Gvardiol, did fantastically, beating Share and putting a really good goal into the bottom corner. And so City got their goal from that. And they really stunned Newcastle. Not stunned, because they're obviously the better team, and I'm sure Newcastle planned for a situation in which they were going to go 1-0 down. But City did their bit, getting 1-0 ahead, but it wasn't clean. They took a mistake from Newcastle for them to really be opened up, and Newcastle were dangerous with their threat. Now, they stumbled onto this because of injuries to Alexander Isak and Callum Wilson, but they've almost gone with almost what Ollie used to do against Manchester City when he'd go Daniel James, Marcus Rashford and Anthony Martial. He's got the Jacob Murphy, he's got the Anthony Gordon and the Harvey Barnes who can break out of these positions and provide a counter-attacking threat and really exploit that space that City leaving behind with the narrow sort of back box four. Lack of quality in the wide areas where Gvardiol can't get back in time, and with the quality they could produce from deep with Bruno Guimaraes getting on the ball, Sandro Tonali, who's a very good player, the powerful movement of Joe Linton. Shah's a very good passer of the ball. They could look to exploit those spaces as quick as possible and getting the ball up the field quickly. And to be fair, City would recover as best they could. Murphy did really well, and I thought Murphy's greatest quality throughout this was just producing little movements that gave him a little bit of an inch away from Gvardiol, away from Diaz, away from Akanji, whoever he was faced up with, just pulling in to then pull a little bit wider to receive the ball from deep in these areas, and his first touch could get out of his feet and he could produce a cross from certain positions. Some were mixed. He produced a few good crosses that didn't result in a goal, but he was always a threat on the counter-attack. As were Gordon and Barnes, but the issue is with Barnes on that left hand side, he had to deal with Walker's recovery pace and his defensive tracking back, which Gvardiol doesn't have that level of quality just yet. So Barnes wasn't able to really get on the ball and cause havoc as much as Murphy was against the opponent he was against. Gordon did well in sort of dropping in, receiving the ball from these deeper areas to help link the play, and then getting behind with his electric speed. So City on the counter attack were always going to be found out, and it was always going to be hard for them with the way they play and the committing the players forward. And that midfield isn't best set up to deal with it because Akanji would drop into the back line, leaving Kovacic a bit isolated and a bit exposed, and making it harder for him to deal with these situations, just to open City up even more. On the few times that Newcastle would look to play out, and it wasn't through a direct counter-attacking threat, this is how it would look. So Newcastle would originally look to build out in a 2-4-4, with Gundogan and Haaland pressing as a sort of 4-4-2. In the front two was that Silva and Grealish would look after the fullbacks. Rico Lewis or Kovacic would push up with one drop deep. It was always a bit inconsistent as to who was doing what in that regard. And Newcastle would look to build up initially. They could go direct, but they would look to build up initially. And the reason for that is because there was two ways they could play out. One of these is because of that lack of real pressing quality from City, and they were lethargic off the ball. They weren't as aggressive in winning the ball back, and it gave Newcastle a bit of space to work with. And there was far too many times with this 4-4-2 shape left Bruno Guimaraes free to receive the ball if they tried to play on the outside and in and beat that City press. The gap they'd leave in between their striker and midfielders was huge, and Guimaraes was given tons of opportunity to get on the ball and produce passes that would turn defence into attack in a quick instant, finding the pace and the runs of the players over the top and get up the pitch. And if it wasn't for that, they could either look to go maybe long to Joel Linton, who would play off of Gordon a bit and maybe go one-on-one with Diaz, and he'd look to win his headers and knockdowns and produce second ball opportunities. Or City would look to build up and say, let's say if Guimaraes got the ball here, that could sometimes be the trigger for Rico Lewis or for someone to come up and press him. And then he'd look to go to Lewis Hall in this area, or Kieran Trippier if it was on the right hand side, who could then look up and look for those direct balls in the fullback area over the top for the winger to go on to. And maybe that's why Kieran Trippier and Lewis Hall started these games, as they're the technical best fullbacks that Newcastle have. They're better passers of the ball and are better creators than Livramento and who else Newcastle would play at fullback. So they could get over the top, they could get in behind, and they could sucker City onto him and exploit space in the middle while doing it. And it was a very, very productive performance on the counter from Newcastle. And again, only got the one goal, but they were always a threat, always carving them open. And as I say, Jacob Murphy, if he gets a few of those crosses right, or someone makes a run and sniffs an opportunity inside the City box, then you could be talking about a different game here. But there we go. That is why it finished 1-1, both teams sharing the spoils. And again, not a terrible result for City. It's nothing they should be completely ashamed about. It's just with what's happened with Rodri, it just feels like they need that bit of a confidence booster. They need just something to get him back in, because there's been a lot of doom and gloom after the Rodri injury. And Newcastle can take a lot of heart. This performance is a lot better than what they've been showing. I know they've gotten results, but this is their best performance, I think, all season. And it's something to build on going forward. And I guess we'll see where this goes for both teams going forward. But I'd love to know what you guys think. Like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you disliked it, comment down below and tell me why either way. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you next time. Tune in tomorrow for Bayern Munich versus Bayer Leverkusen. I'm sure that's a video most of you will want to see. Thank you for watching. In a bit.